Welcome to History Spotlight. This week we discuss two Australian warships, both called the Sydney, one from World War I and the other from World War II. The long search and eventual discovery of the wreck of the World War II Sydney captured the Australian public interest and has been the subject of many articles and documentaries. But perhaps Australian viewers know less about the World War I ship called the Sydney. My guest today is Karen Wansell. Karen is a member of the Canterbury Historical Society and she has a personal connection to the World War I Sydney. Her uncle was on a troop ship being supported by the Sydney and witnessed the sinking of the German warship Emden by the Sydney. Karen, welcome to History Spotlight.
Thank you, Natalie. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we're delighted to have you. Many of our viewers may be surprised to learn that German warships were actually so close to Australia during World War I. Could you perhaps tell us, how close were they?
They were getting very close. They were trying to put out the light station and power network at Cocos-Keeling Island. So that's heading very close to Australian shores.
And in fact, for those of our viewers who aren't sure where that is, we have a map showing that Cocos Island is just off the coast of Western Australia, the northern coast of Western Australia, perhaps a little closer to New Guinea, but still quite close to our shores.
It certainly was.
Now, as I mentioned before, your uncle witnessed a key event in the life of the World War I warship Sydney when it sank the German ship, the Emden. Could you tell us a little about that, please?
Yes, my uncle was on one of the troop ships that were heading for the war in Europe, and they were being escorted by Australian ships, including the Sydney. And in one of his letters home, which I'd like to read to you if I may.
That would be lovely, thank you.
In his letter home, my uncle, John Frawley, says, "We are still anchored here, waiting for our turn to sail. Being the only flagship, we will probably be one of the last to sail, as we have to see the others off. We have had a long, slow trip. We stayed a week in Albany. On November 9th, we had all the excitement. All the while we'd been going carefully, because we know that the German cruiser Emden was about. We used to sail at night with the lights out. On the 9th early, we saw the Sydney break off, and after a while we heard a battle was on. They had the Emden engaged off Cocos Island, and after some desperate fighting, they had to run the Emden to save sinking. The Sydney took all her prisoners and crew on. They killed nearly 200 Germans and only lost 2. The Sydney then set off after the German collier and caught up with her and sank her. I forgot to say, we've had war boats with us when we left Albany, 3 British, 2 Australian and 1 Japanese. And that was part of a letter sent home to his parents.
That's brilliant. A first eyewitness account of the sinking of that ship. And for his family, reading that letter, perhaps they hadn't even known what had been going on just off our north coast.
That's exactly right.
It's quite remarkable. Do we know what became of those 2 ships?
Well, the Emden, as we know, was sunk off Cocos Island and remained there. But the Sydney continued as a warship and eventually was demobilised in 1928 and eventually torn apart. But some of her cannons were saved, and I think there's one in Sydney that has been saved as a memorial to that Sydney.
I believe that might be the one on Bradley's Head, is it?
I think that is the one on Bradley's Head, yes.
And then in World War II there was a new Sydney.
That's right.
And arguably for most Australians, that's the one that's more famous because of the comparative recency of the discovery of the wreckage, I guess, and the dramatic way in which that Sydney was lost. Now, your personal connection to the first Sydney has led you to investigate the outcome of the World War II ship as well, and take a strong interest in both of the ships. Perhaps you could tell us, our viewers, a little bit about where that has led you.
Well, my interest in the first Sydney, as you said, comes from the letter, and then the second Sydney, because of the total loss of life to both the Sydney and the German ship. And that led me to sort of think about that in war there are winners and losers, and both sides lose people. And there are memorials to the Sydney, particularly in Geraldton, and I think perhaps that as a nation, specifically now when we're looking at the centenary of World War I, that we should look at incorporating those memorials to all of those who were lost of war.
Including the German ships.
Including the German ships, including those that were lost on the Japanese ships, and the sort of encompassing that peace aspect. And also the stories that many families have, like my family story.
And so what can our viewers do to get involved in this, Karen?
Well, one of the things I'm doing at the moment is, because of my uncle's letter, is looking at editing a book of letters home. And with the centenary of the World War I and Anzac and Gallipoli, the people are starting to look at what memorabilia they have from grandfathers and uncles and great uncles, and there must be more letters and postcards like that one I have. And so if people want to get involved, we'd love to hear from them and hear their letters.
And of course, those letters don't have to be limited to World War I, don't have to be limited to Australian soldiers, can be to commemorate any family member.
That's exactly
involved
right.
in war.
Anyone's stories. The story of the soldier and the sailor and the airman, the little people that are involved in the war.
And perhaps even some of the people left at home, guarding the shores of their native land.
That's exactly right.
So, if you have a story, if you know someone who has a story, if you've got an idea for a story, please write into us at History Spotlight and we'll make sure that those are passed along to Karen. Do you have any other ways for people to get involved?
I think finding those stories will probably be a good start for everyone.
I agree, and it's a wonderful way for people to get involved and feel like they're connected to the history of not just our nation, but other nations around the world as well. Thank you very much, Karen, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. If you have a story that you think we should share on History Spotlight, please write to us, put a comment on our Facebook page, or send me a tweet. The details are on your screen now. Thank you for joining us on History Spotlight, and enjoy the rest of your day.